We might get started now. I think if you'd like to take your seats, we'll get rolling in the meeting. Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones be turned off or switched to silent. Thanks very much. My name is Councillor Wes Galt, and I'm the chair of this committee. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors. Seated on my left is Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, and Councillor Di Gillies. On the other side of the horseshoe table is Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Jane Addis, Councillor Susan Bigger, and Councillor Victor Franco. I acknowledge our Manager of Governance and Legal, Mr. Brian Wee, to my left, and Director of Urban Living, Mr. Scott Walker, to my right. There are other officers in the chamber tonight, and we'll introduce them as they present. Now, a general introduction. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed on Council's YouTube to enable viewing of the proceedings tonight. The meeting is also being recorded and will be available on Council's YouTube as soon as practicable after the meeting. The primary purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues such as Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. For those presenting the evening, when it comes to the agenda item, I will be introducing the officer and then call you one by one to come forward to the horseshoe table. If you are making submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep the submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you are opposed to the planning application, please tell the committee why you disagree and suggest alternative approaches that would satisfy your concerns. Please focus on your concerns rather than matters of history or detailed in the officer's report. There is a strict 3-minute limit for each speaker, including councillors, and whilst as chair I can vary that time, I seldom do. At the 2.5-minute mark, I will make a sound. That will indicate that you've got 30 seconds left to complete. For those in the gallery this evening, I would like to take this opportunity to remind you to expend due courtesy with respect to each other and to the committee as a whole. This includes remaining quite as quiet while others are addressing the meeting and not disrupting the decision-making process. And just to finish, I would like to encourage all submitters and officers and councillors to speak directly into the microphone, as this will ensure we can all hear what you're saying. Apologies. Mr. Wee, are there any apologies this evening?
Through you, Chair, Councillors Watson and Stavru are apologies this evening.
Thank you. Adoption and confirmation of previous meeting minutes. I'm looking for the Urban Planning Delegated Committee of the 17th of June 2024. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt these minutes? Councillor Hollingsworth. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor Sinfield.
So seconded.
Is anyone opposed? No? So I'll now put the motion. All of those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. I declare the motion carried. Declaration of conflict of interest for any councillor or council officer. Councillors, council officers, are there any conflicts of interest which you wish to foreshadow for matters on the agenda tonight? There are none. Thank you. We'll move straight in then to the body of the meeting. Tonight we are dealing with a planning application for 15 Golding Street, Canterbury. Additions to dwellings in a heritage area, to a dwelling in a heritage area. The officer tonight, Daniela Split-Gerber, our senior planner, will present on behalf of council. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I present UPDC item number 3.1 relating to planning permit application PP 230676 for 15 Golding Street, Canterbury. It is proposed to partially demolish the ground and first floors and construct alterations and additions to the existing dwelling, including the construction of a new front fence in a heritage overlay. A total of 42 objections to the application have been received. The proposal seeks partial demolition of the rear of the existing dwelling, including the carport and shed, and construction of alterations and additions to the dwelling. The additions comprise of a minor extension to the ground floor footprint and the construction of a garage at the rear of the property. At first floor, extension is also proposed, comprising of a bedroom, an ensuite and balcony. A front veranda will also be reinstated. The first floor sits behind the existing chimney and complies with the Heritage Policy's sightline diagram requirement at clause 15.03. All reinstatement and restoration works are supported by Council's Heritage Advisor, and a restoration plan is recommended to be required as a condition of the permit. The proposal also complies with the maximum 2-storey limit set out in the residential zone. Overall, it is considered the proposal is acceptable on the basis it is sympathetically designed, having regard to the heritage character of the area and the relevant decision guidelines of Council's Heritage Policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Tonight we have 3 people who wish to speak. 1 is against the proposal and 2 support it. Once I have announced your name, please come forward and sit at the horseshoe table. If a submitter is not present when I call their name, I shall move on to the next speaker. I remind submitters again of the strict 3-minute limit on speaking. I'd also ask you to please commence your submission with your name and the suburb in which you live. I call upon Andrew Wilson to come forward tonight. Thank you.
Andrew Wilson. I live in Surrey Hills and I'm representing the residents of, I'm an architect, I'm representing the residents of 17 Golding Street, Canterbury, 15 Church Street, Canterbury, 31 Highfield Road, Canterbury, and 145 Wattle Valley Road, Canterbury.
Thank you. If you proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. I'm a local architect working in the area, live in the area for the last 25 years. I'd like to make it clear that I have a lot of respect for the reporting officer, Daniela Splitberger. However, in this particular instance, I have 3 concerns with the officer's recommendations, which my client and I believe the application should be refused. Firstly, the condition of the reinstatement of the front veranda is inadequate. Our concern is enforcement. The reinstatement of the veranda is welcomed, however, it is entirely possible that this may never occur. It is perfectly acceptable that a building permit can be issued, allowing sections of the planning permit to be completed while leaving other aspects to a stage A, B or C. It happens regularly within the industry. The owner can claim they are intending to reinstate the veranda. Accordingly, the veranda condition should state that no certificate of occupancy can be issued for any works on the site without the veranda being reinstated to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. Second, we strongly disagree with the statement on page 10 of the report that the first floor addition is considered to have limited views from the public realm. We disagree for the following reasons. The sightline diagram at the base of page 14 is misleading in our view. This is because the existing pitch roof on which the sightline is based is largely a hip roof that pitches inwards. The small section of gable that this diagram relies on is cherry-picked for an approximately 3.4 metre wide ridge that is more centrally located. Either side of the ridge and the sightline doesn't apply. This is especially the case with the extensive upper level built form to the eastern side. Now this would be very different if it was say a Californian bungalow with a big gable, but it's not. The other point with this is that the report contains on attachment 3.1.3 some oblique views of the front facade. These imply that the Golding Street is flat and does not take into account the considerable slope up Golding Street. There is in fact around 1 metre fall across the front of the site alone, whereas the first floor form will likely come into view at the front of the adjoining properties. This will likely increase to around 1.5 metres. The increased height of this vantage point will mean that the rear form, especially on the eastern side, will be significantly more visible than what has been indicated in our view. Lastly, the report notes that the application is made due to the heritage overlay and amenity impacts which will be assessed at the building permit stage. Whereas this is true, the report information clearly shows that the proposed rear first floor form does not sit within the setback envelope with respect to the rear laneway. This can result in confusion on behalf of both the building surveyor and owner and the adjoining residents. Any permit should note that the application does not satisfy Regulation 79 of the building regulations in relation to the minimum setback from the rear boundary, and that this will require to be a separate reporting consent from the responsible authority. In summary, we're concerned the report may fail to enforce how the demolished veranda will be reinstated. We do not accept the information provided accurately represents the
Mr.
extent
Wilson, can you wrap up now, please?
Sure.
Thanks very much.
to which the rear form will impact the heritage facade, and we'd like the non-compliance with the rear setback explicitly stated on the permit conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to remain in your seat for a moment, we'll see if there's any questions. Councillors, are there any questions of this submitter? Councillor Franco.
Thank you. In relation to the first point you raised, you suggested an approach to including a condition, and I'm sure council officers will comment, but have you ever seen a council apply a condition of that sort, so making it conditional on an occupancy certificate?
In my practice, roughly 30 years, no. However, having had a heritage facade being ripped, torn off without having had a permit application is something that's also exceptionally rare. So it's a circumstance that you hear about in the media once in a while, that the building was ripped down in the pub in the Melbourne, but it's the first time I've come across it in my career. So it is a fairly unique circumstance, and my concern is that given the time that's already elapsed and the fact that this wasn't even picked up by the planners or the heritage architects, even though the facade it's pretty obvious, you can see the flashing and the footings are still there if you walk past today. My concern, well, how do you enforce that? And if you actually, because you can actually you can take out a building permit for partial works, but if you attach that condition to certificate of occupancy and say, well, you can't actually occupy this, and I'm not sure the legalities of that, you need to look into it, but I'm just thinking pragmatically how you could possibly enforce that occurring.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, Chair. On your third point, you mentioned the non-compliance. Is that referenced in the council officer's report?
Yeah, the very first page that was brought up.
Okay. All right.
The very first slide that was there, you could see the side setback envelope cutting through the back of the building, the proposed works.
Okay. Thank you.
No more questions, Councillor Franco?
No.
There doesn't appear to be any further questions for the chamber tonight. You may return to your seat.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I now call upon Tony Jackson to come forward and speak to us. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm Tony Jackson. I live in Hawthorn. I'm the architect for the applicant at number 15. One of the reasons I was selected as their architect was my empathy and understanding of the existing contributory dwelling. I have had a great deal of experience working on heritage structures, from imported iron cottages, Werribee Manor for 6 years, rural homesteads, and of course in Burundara, our Hawthorn office does a lot of work in Hawthorn on heritage. When I commenced this project, the front veranda was already demolished as it was greatly deteriorated, and its decorative ridge tiles were also removed on the dwelling itself for cleaning and for resetting and new pointing. The owner wasn't aware of the need for permits at that time, and this was separate to my brief, and we determined to be treated separately by themselves. However, the planners have brought it into this realm now. So the current owners are extremely passionate about the integrity and the features of the dwelling, and combined with their engineering background, they've created a meticulous reinstatement report. It's now being fed through the Planning Department and Heritage, which they have. They've even gone to the bother of machining all the timber to imperial sizes, which is pretty good these days rather than off the shelf. So they're passionate about getting it right. All the markings are on the wall as to its set out and all of that. We're in the planners and heritage hands as to whether they want a heritage advisor associated or not. At this stage, I understand working off this report will suffice. The veranda rebuild has not yet commenced. The missing veranda timber components have been machined to their size, as I said. This reinstatement is straightforward as the brick wall waits for the veranda to be abutted into the existing holes and paint marks. It's all the remnant surface. It's all there for them to read. So the owners have created this report showing how competently and fully he has studied the deteriorated veranda, which was dangerous and rotted. To address these issues that the previous speakers talked about, the setbacks we know about, and it's allowable to apply for a report and consent, which is exactly our intent. Hence, we show clearly in the documents where the setbacks are non-compliant but allowable under report and consent. If it's not back, so be it, but we're allowed to apply. So sight lines are accurate, but it's been raised, so of course we'll check our 3D modelling to make sure that sight lines, oblique sight lines and the sight lines from the other side of the street are correct. The materials scheduled, we're addressing to be cream in colour for the front fence, and we've addressed the third level roof space.
Mr. Jackson, could you please move towards wrapping up? Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Finished?
That's fine.
Terrific. Thank you very much. There are some questions tonight. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, for your presentation, and I appreciate you've got the document there, which I assume is the conservation plan.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask you, have the owners been able to locate photos of the original home? I'm just not sure how they know how to reinstate the original front veranda.
Yes, they are very good researchers themselves, and I've seen Mohan's work, the owner, and it's meticulous, and I've seen a lot of people reinstate stuff, from heritage architects through to heritage tradespeople. He has that under control, although it's not officially as a heritage architect or whatever else, but he's documented it, he's matched it, he's reinstating it, just as any reinstatement project would be done. It satisfied me, but I'm not a heritage architect, but I've had the experience, and I know he's doing the right passionate thing. If there's any other layers that need to be applied to ensure it satisfies heritage, and Burundara's heritage advisor, then I'm certain the owners would be happy to do so.
Thank you. And one more question, if I may. It states there's 32% garden area retained. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, the schedule's on the drawings, and that's all from CAD and formulas. So I'll check anything, but it should be accurate.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to ask you
Yes.
if your client has engaged you to also do a landscape plan, or if you're aware of any intent to provide any canopy trees.
They welcome the North Garden as their recreation and play space. The North Garden would be with limited understanding what they're doing, but it's going to be formalised into more of a garden, but that's longer term. So no, I'm not engaged to lay out a landscape plan.
Yes, no, thank you. I was just curious if there was anything to be attached with regard to landscape design. Thank you. That's my questions.
Thanks very much. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mr. Jackson. The document you've got there, which Councillor Hollingsworth, I think, asked you about, can I confirm that that is what you're going to submit as the heritage restoration document, or you're going to submit that, and should it need to be altered, upgraded, that will occur?
Yes, there will be upgrading. This is being created by the owner, not by ourselves, and I've checked it, it's been submitted. I believe that Heritage may be revising or upgrading it, the Heritage Advisor. So I believe the report will be to the satisfaction of the Heritage Advisor ultimately.
And, sorry, I just didn't quite hear you say you have submitted that already, or?
Yes, that's part of the submission, and the Heritage Advisor has, I believe, taken it and revised it. Daniela
We
will
can
be able to
check
upgrade that.
with
but,
that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Bigger.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Jackson. I'm over here. Can I just check about the reinstatement then of the veranda? Was that, it looks like from the papers that was an amendment. Was that not originally
Correct.
part?
It wasn't a part of our original briefing. It had already been demolished. A builder had come to do the works, hadn't advised the owner that a permit is required because it was dangerous anyway, so the owner went along, it was demolished. So when I came, it wasn't there, determined to leave it out, not to complicate or muddy the waters. We just do what we're dealing with, and the owners would deal with Heritage and the front veranda themselves. However, the planners have brought it into the documentation and planning permit application now.
Do you, if I might, just to clarify then, do you mean that it was always their intention to reinstate the veranda, or it
Oh,
was
yes.
not necessarily their intention?
Always their intention, and when I went to site, all this machining of the timbers and things to improve, it had all been done
For the front veranda?
for the front veranda, as well as having the decorative tiles all in order and sequenced out in rows like a little 3-year-old boy would lay out his toy cars.
Okay, thank you very much.
Not that I'm saying he's immature.
No more questions from councillors. Thank you very much. Mr. Jackson, you may return to your seat.
Thank you.
I now call upon Mr. Mohan Kumar to join us at the table. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Mohan. My wife's sitting there. Netra, we are the owners, co-own the property. So we...
Excuse me, you dwell at the property now. That's your address.
Not at the moment. We dwell nearby in Canterbury.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would like to talk about our perspective rather than the specifics which has already been answered through the planning application and the amendments. As a young family, we fell in love with the property when we first saw it. We liked the unique characteristics of Edwardian architecture, the period detailing, the high ceilings, and the feel of bygone era. We consider it a privilege to be able to restore and live in such an amazing piece of history and architecture. And we understand that it must be taken care of and passed on to the future generations. We come from a background where heritage structures are respected while growing up and learned its importance. We originally started with a small maintenance of the property as it hadn't been kept well over a long period. However, the scope started to grow organically into a large project. The rapid pace made us pause the renovations midway to rethink our approach holistically, considering our long-term family requirements. That is when we approached Tony, our architect. We have brought a copy of the document we have prepared about the restoration works for you to look over, where we have detailed the reasoning for the removal of the front veranda and the terracotta roof detailing. However, I wanted to briefly mention that the veranda was dangerous from a structural and a high lead exposure perspective. We had a 4-year-old at the time running around. It was also assessed by a assessed as highly likely to fall by the then builder, and they removed it without suggesting us about the permit requirements. However, we asked them to dismantle it carefully, and we took the original pieces to Karam Woodcraft and have them remade as explained in our documentation. Also, the terracotta elements were carefully removed so they were not damaged during roof restoration work. We also used them as templates to custom make them in gargoyles and dragons for the missing pieces. We are passionate and meticulous in bringing the property back to its former glory, and we hope you understand our journey and support it.
Thank you very much. Councillors, are there any questions of this submitter? There don't appear to be any. Mr. Kumar, you can return to your seat now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will now return to officers for matters arising.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm able to address some concerns raised in the submissions as follows. With regards to the reinstatement of the veranda, Council's Heritage Advisor has reviewed the veranda restoration document, and they are satisfied that it provides the details required to properly reinstate the veranda to its original form. A condition on the permit will also require specific details of how this is to be constructed through the submission of the Heritage Restoration Report, and that must be to the satisfaction of Council for approval. In relation to the sightline diagrams, Council's Heritage Advisor has reviewed the plans and is satisfied with the additions and alterations, and that the sightline complies with the Council's heritage policy of clause 15.03, and that thus the height and setbacks are considered appropriate. In terms of the building report and consent concerns, this is a separate process and considered separately at the building permit stage. Thank you.
Councillors, are there any questions of the officers? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Spigliopa, just wanted to check with the reinstatement of the terracotta roof ridges. Is that also going to form part of the planning permit condition?
Yes, that's part of the restoration report, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Through you to officers. Just picking up a couple of points the first presenter raised. The words were used, oblique sightlines. From a heritage perspective, are they actually considered, or are they pretty much taken from street front on?
Sorry, was that the obliques?
Correct.
They were considered at the time of the report, yes.
And they're
yes.
acceptable?
Yes.
Thank you. Just touching on your last point, the report and consent. The first presenter spoke about a condition for an occupancy permit. My understanding is, given this is merely a planning application, we can't enforce an outcome that informs a building permit or a condition on a permit. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Through your chair, there's two matters there. So there was a suggestion that the restoration be linked to a certificate of occupancy under the building regulations. It would not be lawful to link those regulations into the planning permit. We'll need to manage that under the expiration of the planning permit. The second part was in relation to the report and consent required for the setback envelope at the rear, which doesn't meet the building regulations. We would not impose a condition under the planning permit for that separate process.
Thank you. So just to pick up on that front veranda, what mechanisms can officers take to ensure that that's, I don't think there's any concern because we've heard about it, but just for the benefit of the first presenter and the residents, are there any mechanisms that you can take to enforce its construction given it's a planning permit?
The detail endorsed under the permit and the need to complete the development in accordance with the permit are both matters which are enforceable.
Councillor Radis.
Thanks. I think Councillor Thompson's largely asked them, but just to follow on with the requirement to do as they say they're going to do, would that work? How would that work? Somebody would report that it hadn't been completed correctly, and then council would go out and ensure that it was? Or I guess we're just seeking reassurance that it will be followed up and we can be sure that the reinstatement of the roof and the veranda occur.
Through you, Chair, for any matter where a non-compliance or breach is a concern of a resident, we have investigation officers that are able to attend the site and form a view if there's any deviations and whether further action is required.
Thank you. And again, this is probably a repeat, but I just want to be sure that you believe that we shouldn't say anything in this process about the building permit matter, that should be kept entirely separate.
Through you, Chair, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. I do have a motion when the time is right.
Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, I just had a quick question from about on page, I think it's page 6 of 13, the reference to the attic and the legal advice that we received about that not being a third story. I'm just conscious, having had another example of this, if at some stage that, we're saying there's no lining and no floorboards and so on, which would make that not a story. If at some stage that were to change, would that be in breach of this planning permit and would need to be undone? Is that correct? And that would stand forever unless they were to apply for a new permit. I just wanted to make sure that that's enforceable.
Through you, Chair, technically yes, it is enforceable if that was brought to our attention.
So I'm tempted to follow up on the word technically. Is your use of that word has to do with the fact that we might not necessarily be aware of that change being made, but if we were made aware, that would be an action that we could and would take?
Through you, Chair, that's correct, yes.
Thank you.
That appears to exhaust all the...
I have a question.
Councillor Franco.
Thank you. I'd just like to continue on from the point that Councillor Bigger raised. If the flooring were to be reinstated, would it not be a simple matter for an applicant wanting to do that to simply apply and say they want to instate some flooring and that there's no change to the overall building envelope, and simply make an application? If that application were approved, then that would be approved. Would that not be the case?
Through you, Chair, perhaps there's another element here, and this relates to the Burundara planning scheme. So the issue is that in the particular residential zone, a development can only be 2 stories. So it doesn't matter that the applicant applies to say, oh, well, this is only a minor change because within the envelope that's been approved. It would constitute a change to the way that building is defined. It would now be defined as a 3-storey building, which would be a breach of the Burundara planning scheme and therefore would not be permitted.
And just to follow on, and that would not be permitted by VCAT either. That wouldn't be possible to apply and seek an...
No, through yourself, Chair, because it's not a breach of the planning permit, it's a breach of the planning scheme. So that's hardwired into the planning scheme, and VCAT would have no discretion to approve outside of the planning scheme either.
So it's probably simply a matter of waiting until the planning scheme changes. Thank you.
Well, then it's not a breach.
Mr. Storer, do you wish to speak at this point in time? You don't. Thank you. Councillor Addis, your light is still on. Do you wish to?
I do have another question. Sorry. So technically all the people who store stuff in their roof space and have put a bit of flooring in so it doesn't fall through their ceiling are breaching the regulations, are they?
Through yourself, Chair, no. There would need to be a practical application of how a story is defined, and there will be some of those grey areas that you're referring to there, essentially.
So, I'm sorry, just to follow up. The way I understood this application, it was considered an attic, not a story, which would seem, anyway, I suppose it doesn't matter, but it would seem to be okay. Maybe don't comment, but I'll leave it at that. And I do have a motion if nobody else has any questions.
Well, Councillor Thompson does have a question, so I'd let him go first.
Thanks, Chair. There's a very good-looking section, GG, on the proposed plans which show that roof space that we're talking about quite clearly. I can see from this the pitching point of the very ridge of that roof is 1.5 metres in height, and it's falling from that height down to at 45 degrees, so it's not a very big space. Officers, is there a height, ceiling height, which you would define as a livable space? Because 1.5 metres is very uncomfortable.
Through yourself, Chair, yes, there would be. It's ultimately defined under the building regulations before it can be classified as a livable space or a habitable space. So I can't remember what that is, 2.2 metres thereabouts. But
about 1.98 metres, if I'm
something
correct.
Like that.
Which this isn't, so I don't think there's any concerns from anyone, or from me at least, that this is anything but an attic.
That seems to have exhausted all the questions. Thank you very much. Councillor Addis, you mentioned you'd like to move a motion.
Yes, thanks, Chair. The officer's recommendation, please.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Thompson, you're happy to second that? Is anyone opposed to the motion as moved? Unopposed. Thank you. Councillor Addis, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you very much. In many ways, I think it's quite refreshing to see an application that it isn't a shipping container stuck on the back of a heritage house. And while I know that can be acceptable, when I look at this, I actually quite like it. And that's not to put down the concerns of those who have objected, but I did want to say up front that it is nice to see people who actually appear to care for the area in which they live and are celebrating the heritage by restoring things in the way that we understand is going to happen. So to address the concerns, I think they're understandable, but they clearly relate to the fact that we're here to make a decision on a planning application, and many of the issues that, again, people are rightly concerned about are actually going to be addressed elsewhere and will be addressed elsewhere. So what I'm seeing is a planning application that is compliant and that I think has made a real effort to blend in with the neighbourhood character. So I know no one's against it, but I do commend this motion and, in a sense, commend commend the applicant for making an effort to produce this. Thank you.
Unless anyone feels a busting need to speak further, I propose to put this motion at this point in time. All of those for? It appears to be unanimous. The motion is carried. Thank you very much. I will now move on to general business. Councillors, are there any matters of general business? None. Urgent business? Also none. Confidential business? None. Thank you very much. Before I close the meeting, I want to thank you all who have joined us this evening and declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting now closed. Thank you.